Welcome to Zen Money Monday, weekly conversations with innovators, thought leaders, and entrepreneurial junkies about building good businesses, exploring what the idea of Zen money really means, and how to achieve it. With your host, author, business strategist, and Zen Money CFO, Liz LaJoy.
Hey, Mara, I'm so excited to finally have you on the show.
I'm so excited to come. I don't know why we didn't think of this sooner.
Because everybody's busy. But I am excited to have you here to talk about education and the business of education, because it's on so many people's minds, so many parents' minds, especially now with COVID and people being at home and all of that stuff. I just know there's so much conversation about different kinds of learning. And so I just want to start a little bit in terms of your background, because you came from traditional schooling, traditional public schooling systems, and then you branched out on your own. Can you talk a little bit about what micro schools really are from your perspective?
I'll talk a little bit about my story, but I want to make sure you remember to ask me this about why I think school is actually all about money.
Mm-hmm.
This is your podcast. But anyway, so my story is, I was a public school teacher. I started out my career. I got my master's in education right out of college, a year after college. I got a Master of Arts in Teaching. I subbed for 3 years and landed my first contractual position in the Pittsburgh Public Schools. I was a kindergarten teacher, and then it was half day, and I wound up teaching half-time in one of the city's magnet schools. After doing 2 years of that, I wound up full-time at the magnet school and spent the rest of my public school teaching career in this amazing school that was designed to tackle the issues of segregation in Pittsburgh. People are segregated by neighborhood. A lot of it has to do with ethnicity too, but there were definitely issues of the schools being very segregated. And so the city created these magnet programs in the 90s. The school I wound up in was a traditional academy, but it morphed into an arts and humanities magnet school. It was an incredible place to teach. I loved it there. And yet somewhere in the deep of my heart, I knew there were just something wasn't quite right. And I can remember walking down the hall thinking, gosh, I wish somebody would open a school where I could teach the kids the way I want to, the way that I know is the way I should be teaching them. Yeah, so I taught in the public schools, and the course of things, I got extra education, found that I couldn't really use it. I went into teacher staff development at a local regional service organization, did that, wrote grants, did professional development, wound up in a school district as the director of staff development, technology integration, data and assessment, new teacher staff induction, and federal programs. So like 5 people's jobs. Only to have that job eliminated at the end of the year because they were hiring a new superintendent and needed more money for her salary. So it's funny. I said to you at the beginning, school is about money. I wish that it wasn't that way, but everything that I see points to that. All of the Common Core standards came into play. There are a lot of people who say that that's absolutely related to the big textbook companies. I mean, if they don't have a reason to be redoing their textbooks, how did they get people to buy new textbooks?
Right. Especially in things like math and science where, we're not, literature is a whole different game, but in those big textbooks, I mean, the math itself hasn't changed. So why do we need $200 new books every other year?
Well, I will say, in defense of the textbook companies, things do need to be updated and edited and revised, and things do change. And for sure, a lot of our textbooks have been woefully inadequate in addressing people of color and their stories, their history. So, there is a really good reason for textbooks to be revised. But I think that, our big textbook companies and our big assessment companies drive an awful lot of what happens in our schools.
Well, even aside from that, I think I think that we as citizens pay our taxes. We assume, depending on where you live, maybe you're moving to put your kids in a better school system or not. We do somehow at the back end recognize that money is beneficial when it comes to, better education or more quality education. But at the same time, there's sort of this, we pay into the system, it's taken care of. Somehow it's more kind of nonprofity, or we don't think about it like a business, that the money matters, but obviously it does. It has to do with teacher salaries. It has to do with the level of supplies and resources that we can, give to a community. And I think we often disassociate from that for some reason.
Well, and really, if parents, if people who are listening to your podcast were to look at the wheels of a school district, and that's really what most of us here in the U.S., tackle with. So schools started out as singular entities. Our one-room schoolhouses were pretty much owned by and run by the communities that they lived in. And the people who paid the salary of the teacher made the decisions about what happened. When there was this decision to begin to create a more standardized system of education to be of benefit to business and industry, it was the Rockefellers and their ilk. Sorry about that. I have like a frog in my throat today. Well, that wasn't me coughing about the Rockefellers, but there was this decision to begin to create some new standards so that they could develop a better citizen who was better prepared to be a worker in, an industrial system and an industrial economy. There were decisions made to pull schools together and to have them have oversight done by a central office. As our school districts have continued to grow, there's a lot of consolidation of resources, which, makes a lot of sense financially. Hasn't always been the best decision for the kids, because a lot of kids, you live in rural communities, kids are on buses for long times going to schools in more highly populated areas, and decisions are being made at a grander scale, at a grosser scale. It's why we have all these assessments. We need to collect this data to see how are we doing in general. So much of the focus has actually been taken away from the kid, that's what education's about. I mean, you'll see lots of teachers talk about, I teach English, or I teach French, or I teach, whatever content area you might choose. But if you really think about it, you don't teach content, you teach kids. You offer the content knowledge to kids as part of their education. And it's kind of like, well, you live in New England, the whole metaphor of the lobster thrown in the pot of cold water and brought up to temperature doesn't notice that it's being boiled to death, versus the lobster that you toss into the hot water screams. I think they actually do scream. This has happened slowly over time. And frankly, most of us, myself included, like I was raised at a time where education was pretty much the way that it is now, with some slight changes. So we are like the lobster that's been brought to a boil in the pot. Things have gotten really difficult now, especially like with COVID. The systems were not ready, capable, or able for the most part to handle this kind of a crisis of children not being able to be in a central location where all of the resources have been gathered together for a long period of time. And teachers had not been prepared to teach online for the most part. I mean, I've been teaching online for 10 years. So there was absolutely, I'm teaching grad students, but there was no hiccup in my schedule at all, except for the fact that my grad students were coming in exceptionally stressed, exceptionally tired, and finding it very challenging to do the work I was asking them to do, because they were working extra hours every day, just being able to figure out what to do for their students.
Right. Yeah. I think it's definitely been a transition, whether you're in the public school setting, private school setting, or, attempting some additional form of learning. And obviously, it really depends on age levels and things like that in terms of what we're able to do effectively with technology. But I want to bring it back a little bit to the concept of micro schools and how and why that intrigued you to kind of jump ship from traditional teaching.
Sure. So 7 years ago, when I lost my job in the school district, I went on unemployment for the very first time in my life. And I have to tell you, that was something I never, ever thought would happen.
Yeah. How'd that feel?
I'm pretty awful. Pretty awful. I mean, I can't, it's very rare, I think, that you lose your job and think like, woohoo.
Yay, I get to sit around and have, 30 cents on the dollar put in my pocket for free. Like, nobody enjoys that. I think that's a money conversation we need to have more. as a, community, as a culture, because there is this idea that there are people out there scrambling to effectively, take advantage of the unemployment system. Most of us want to be doing productive work. Let's be honest.
Well, I know for a fact, like I actually thought about not taking unemployment, and I had a number of really wise friends say like, Mara, you have paid into that system for a long time. You have every right to take that. So I did go on unemployment for 6 months. I did look for a job as I was required to do. I went out on a few interviews. I didn't get any job offers. And I will tell you, I went into those job interviews.
And when was this again? Was this during the recession?
About 7 years ago. So 2013. With my eyes wide open, being really fairly clear about what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do. And I can remember actually going to a school district interview, and it was a panel interview, very first interview. There were like 6 or 8 principals and the superintendent and there were all these people sitting at the table, and they're all talking to me, and I'm listening to the questions, and it became really clear to me about halfway through that this position I was interviewing for was a brand new job that was it was a catch-all position for everything that other people did not want to do.
Yeah, fun.
And I thought, I asked some really tough questions. I didn't get offered the job, which is great because I didn't want that kind of a job. I was at this point where I thought, I can't keep doing what somebody else is asking me to do when I know it's not benefiting kids and it's not making me happy.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, so at that point I started working on an idea for a business. I had my doctorate in instructional technology. So my first business that I created for myself was called Mindful Technology Consultants. So I had some clients who were small business owners, and I was consulting with them on technology. But what happened was when the unemployment ran out, I hadn't gotten a job. So I just went headfirst into making that business go and made some pretty difficult choices. I sold my townhouse, bought a 900 square foot apartment for cash. Actually I enacted my retirement at 45 so that I could afford to live in that it was a co-op apartment. So like I did all of these crazy things to make my business work, slashed tons of cost. Overhead related to living and my business, and started doing the consulting and started really digging into why is education the way that it is? What were the foundations in place behind it? What was kind of like wrong with it? And much to my surprise, actually, I found out that really, I don't think education was designed to do the things that most people think it's designed to do. I do believe it, it was designed for a time. The system that we have right now was designed for a time when we had all of these immigrants coming in from many different countries who needed to learn English, who needed to learn how to become citizens so that they could participate in our government. And they needed to be trained to become workers in our big industries. That is a system that doesn't actually serve the needs of this country anymore, I don't think. And I think that kids know it. Like they know that school is not what they want it to be. So, in the middle of all this.
Teachers do too. Because had my aha when you were talking about the interview situation. I mean, I just think that, as you know, my husband is a 25 plus veteran teacher as well. And, the stories that he brings home mirror that issue where kids aren't given a lot of autonomy. It's very structured, but teachers have lost so much autonomy in terms of sort of the creative part of their position and their role as an instructor because of all of these now check marks and balances and testing. And, there's just so much pressure and paperwork put on teachers these days that you sit in an interview and there is no two-way street, right? Like you go into an interview, hopefully, in the business world, and there's back and forth to kind of try out and be like, hey, do we like each other? And I think in the public education system, it's so formulated and so structured. Like there's not a lot of personality or individuality you can bring to teaching these days because of the structure. And I think the structure is important in some cases, but it has created a situation where a lot of people are very unhappy with what they're having to do every day. Like, I got into teaching because I love teaching, and that's not really what I'm doing now.
I think that people can get hired because of great personality, but at the end of the day, I don't think there's a whole lot of opportunity to use it
Right.
in the system with all that system of checks and balances. And that is ultimately why I left my job in the city schools. So most of my colleagues thought I was nuts. I was at 20 plus years. I was at the top of the pay scale. So I was just shy of making six figures. I mean, Pittsburgh Public School had a really good pay structure and really good benefits. And I also had tenure. So, I would have had to have screwed up royally to lose that job. But I wasn't happy. I can remember telling someone, I'm actually going to go take this job at the intermediate unit because, by the way, I took a $20,000 pay cut and I went from 10 months to 12 months as an employee. But I was happy again. Like, I was doing things that made me light up, things that I was invested in doing. I was given a ton of freedom. I wrote a federal grant with some friends. We got it. And then most of my job for the next 4 years was administering this federal grant for arts educators. So I got to create professional development that was super creative, super collaborative, and just everybody had a lot of fun. So, I saw that it was possible. So I started my own business. I started thinking about school and, why I wasn't able to really make change within. Because I, like so many people, I thought, I'm being really constrained as a teacher in my classroom. But if I go into administration, maybe I can actually help make a difference there.
I can be an advocate. I can be an advocate at that level. It'll be great.
Yeah. And the reality is there's even less freedom in administration than there is in the classroom. So this is a word to the wise teachers. Like, if you think you're going to get more freedom by becoming a central office employee, you might want to think twice about it.
Look hard at what that really entails.
Because the fact is that you really wear, like, you have to do multiple people's jobs. Our principals are incredibly overloaded. Like when my position got cut, a lot of the work that I did wound up on the plates of the principals in the school district.
Yeah.
So.
And just to clarify, I mean, we're not here to bash the public system. There's so much great stuff. It's just there's so many people working really hard and are feeling very constrained these days, which is, I think, what led you to your MicroSchool Builders initiative.
Yeah, it is. And so, I mean, I think that what's going to happen with COVID, you're already hearing stories about school districts that were already strapped, during the pandemic have had to spend money to get technologies into the hands of students, to provide additional training to their teachers on how to teach online. They've had to create COVID response processes and plans for the fall, which, some of the school districts are looking at kids being on a these rotational schedules where they have small groups of kids, and then there's all of these procedures in place for checking temperatures and keeping kids apart proper distances. And these are massive expenditures on the part of school districts that many were already running, at a deficit. So we're looking at the pandemic putting a massive strain on school districts that were already taxed, which means more work for less money for a lot of people. I'm not saying this stuff to, like, you can even hear my voice. Like, it's a problem. I'm not saying we should close our public schools, because there would be a whole heck of a lot of kids who would not get an education without them.
Yeah, I think the conversation that's important to have is just, let's be honest about the reality here. One of our good friends is an elementary school teacher here locally, and she was laying it out like this. She's like, okay, so let's say we do this hybrid thing, and I've got, a third of my class in the classroom at any time. I can't lean over them and check their work and do all the things I normally do with them in the classroom because of COVID. I can't get that close and up in person. And then the other 2/3 of my class is I also have to be in visual line for the camera, and they have to be seeing what I'm doing. And I have to be able to answer emails and check those things and interact with everybody in the online space. How I want to do whatever we need to do, but how is this going to work? Like, how is it actually feasible? Right. And I think those are things that, very nitty gritty things that put extra pressure on the teachers, not to mention the kids being like, kindergartners aren't going to keep masks on. That's just going to be,
No.
really tough day for everybody, right?
So the thing about it is, we've jumped to all of this online learning as a solution. And I will say, at least it's better than the kids not having anything at all.
Yeah.
But the fact is, online education is, it's very different. It behaves very differently than the traditional classroom learning does. And it takes some time to learn how to learn that way as a student, and it takes time to learn how to teach that way as a teacher. You can't actually translate the things that you do in the traditional classroom into effective online teaching. You have to think outside of the box, and you have to, the way that I teach online, I teach using inquiry methods, but I'm also working with adults. So I can say to them, okay, here's the topics we're looking at, but what I want you to do is focus on what are your big questions about these topics. I want you to investigate them. I want you to share them with me and your classmates so that we all are enriched by the experience of independent learning that's shared within a community. It's incredibly powerful, I must tell you. I get good evaluations. Most people don't. They're not used to that in the beginning, and I have to do a little bit of hand-holding to help them with that. But, that kind of independent but collaborative learning is really powerful because we're learning from each other. It works with kids, but it takes time to build the skills to have kids working independently. And that's not something that school typically does. Kids, that's one of the major, I don't want to say complaints. I think just major challenges of the way that we do school is that we're not creating independence in our learners. That's why this COVID time has been so difficult for so many people, for so many parents, because your kids didn't have the skills they needed to self-regulate their learning activities while you were busy working.
Right.
So, because they hadn't been given the freedom to pick something that they wanted to learn, to go at it full bore with intensity for days at a time, which is something that happens in micro schools and alternative schools. Kids have found it hard to be away. So you asked a little bit about micro schools. So in a roundabout way, we're coming to that. So about 5 years ago, at night, I started having dreams about one-room schoolhouses. And I thought, what the heck is that? We'd wake up and I would remember being in a one-room schoolhouse. So I started doing my own inquiry around that. They do still exist. You can find them generally in remote places. There's a bunch of them up off the coast of Maine. In fact, as part of my research, I was going to go up and visit one, and I wound up actually getting recruited to come and open the school and teach in it one fall. And I was able to do that for about 3 months, and at which point I decided that I was really not cut out for that because it was so remote. It was 25 miles off the coast on an island that was 2 miles long and 1 mile wide. And in the wintertime, there were supposedly under 40 people on the island. So maybe your brain can go where my brain was going. I was just there is no way I'm going to survive being that isolated. I just knew myself. I'm too social. But I learned a lot about what it takes to run a school yourself. I learned a ton about what the budget looks like for a small school, because on the island, I actually saw the budget. I was in, I knew that. I can tell you the budget was about $150,000 a year. $50,000 went for my salary. There was a pot of about $50,000 that was used for sort of the hard pieces of this, maintaining the school, the fuel, oil, the electricity, the internet, the books, technologies. And then about $50,000 was put aside for special education and for the supports of a retired superintendent of schools who was acting as the superintendent. This island was its own school district, by the way.
Sure.
But I looked at it and I thought, it's a pretty simple budget. And
the budgeting math is really easy. We just, in certain circumstances, don't necessarily see the whole picture or feel like we have much control over it. But in a circumstance like that, you do, and you can start to think about it from a business perspective.
Yeah. Now, in the case of this school, it was actually still part of the Maine public school system. So I was required to use curriculum and to give assessments and to follow the standards. But it got me thinking about, there was a lot more freedom I had. I could, quote unquote get away with a lot more because I was out there by myself, and I was the principal, I was the teacher, I was the nurse and the gym teacher and the music teacher and the art teacher and the part-time custodian and every other
Mm-hmm.
job you can think of. I was all of those except for the special education person. And I did have a superintendent who, checked in on me to make sure I was,
Not going off the rails.
I mean, as best as he could, because he was talking with me over Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
That to get on and off the island, you had to fly. So, some of the big hard expenses were were transportation.
Mm-hmm.
Flying to school. So, but I did start to think about, well, what if I had the school and I had that kind of budget, but I could do what I wanted to do. And really the MicroSchool idea was born in that. And a lot of what I have built into my business, which now is called MicroSchool Builders, I owe to that experience because there were, the notion of a teacher owning their own school and having a fairly small budget, being the single person at the beginning, starting small, and connecting to other teachers via Zoom to support each other and to brainstorm ideas. Those are all part of what I've wrapped up into my business. I started from the island. I started working on, well, what's the process I need to go through to get that school open? I ended up writing 2 books, mapping out a 10-week program. I've now
to help people kind of decide if this is a good fit, what would it really take, that kind of stuff, right?
Not only to help people figure out if it's a good fit. I have some pieces in place, like a quiz, and I do calls with people to talk with them about their ideas, to help them see if they're really ready and have what it takes to open a school. And I will be honest, Liz, I am getting more and more calls every day of people who are like absolutely ready and have what it takes to do this. But I have a whole series of services that I offer, from a 10-week program that helps you get ready to take your idea, put it into a blueprint form so that you can launch. And then I have a year-long program where I support people as they get launched and opened and deal with that whole first year of navigating school opening and get it running, and really my big focus is on making sure that the school is really financially viable.
Yeah.
And I've been really, so, full disclosure, I'm working with you on that, and I'm really pleased to have you come in and work with my clients on that, because it's something that teachers have. There's a lot of teachers out there who have a great head for what a small school would look like, what the day would look like, how they're going to work with children differently from the way they worked in their public or private school position. But the thing that almost all of them need support around is actually the finance part. And it's been a lot of fun to strengthen those skills on my own as a business owner, and then to see them all strengthen their skills financially as well.
What do you, from your perspective, moving from a traditional teaching environment to entrepreneurship and small business ownership, what has been one of the biggest ahas for you?
I don't know if it's so much of an aha. Well, as far as the financial parts are, it's not as hard as I thought it would be. It's just, I made it scarier in my head. It's definitely easier when you have somebody who knows what they're doing to show you the way. And isn't that the way I don't know why I thought it would be any different with money.
Because I think it's because we think we're supposed to know this stuff already, or that somehow we'll just learn through osmosis. I'll just get started and all the pieces, the tiles will line up, and then we're surprised when it's not. I hear that a lot. I had the same, I think we all have some version of that experience where, that stuff will just figure itself out. And it doesn't. And it's weird that we look at it that way, whereas we're perfectly happy to learn and actively learn in all kinds of different areas, but money is not so much.
I think that probably the biggest aha was that becoming an entrepreneur has meant, and joyfully now means, that my lifelong learning pathways will be focused primarily on things related to growing and building and strengthening and anchoring a business, because I have a really big vision for what I want to do related to education, and it's going to take continued learning. So, I've worked with 3 different coaches in the past 5 years to build and, well, actually, no, I'd say, I know 4, because I'm working with you now. So, a whole bunch of different kinds of people to build skill sets around running, managing, owning, promoting a business. And it has required me to continue to learn, which is probably it's a good thing. It would be a bad thing if I wasn't learning, considering that my business is founded on creating spaces of learning, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you, just so listeners can understand, like where do you find it most effective from finding potential clients, kind of having this conversation out in the world? How are you connecting with people?
Well, I did, like a lot of business coaches will tell you to start out organically, and I did do that. But pretty rapidly, I realized that I wasn't going to find teachers congregated in a central gathering space to talk about. Well, let me take that back. I would find teachers in the teacher's room talking about how unhappy they are, right? But I don't actually have access to the teacher's lunchroom in
Right.
a bunch of schools. Nor would I actually be comfortable going in, or would teachers be comfortable having me come in and interjecting myself into those kind of conversations to potentially recruit them to leave their school jobs and start a school. It's one of those very private thoughts that people have. I think teachers don't talk about the fact that they have fantasies about starting their own school.
In the same way that they don't tell anybody that they're about to jump ship to a different school district, right? Like you just keep that close to the vest until it's time to leave, I think, in that industry a lot.
Yeah. So because teachers aren't gathering doing that, there's a couple ways that I've marketed this work. I worked with a coach for over a year to learn how to build Facebook ads and how to use those to direct teachers to our website so that they could learn more about building schools. And if you run a Facebook ad for long enough, you actually pull really decent metrics that helps Facebook to get you the kind of person who would be thinking about leaving school, or would be talking about wanting to do something different, or would be
Yeah, because not all of your clients, I mean, just to clarify here too, I think there's a wide range of people who are interested in the concept of either creating something for their own kids, especially these days, or moving out of a more traditional setting. So, I think what's cool about your business is, I think you went into it, because I have historical knowledge here, that you went into it thinking, I'll be working with teachers who are sick of working in the public school systems. But the reality is that's not always the case. I mean, sometimes that's the case, but sometimes it's, really proactive, educationally oriented people who want to create this for their communities, for their own children, whatever it might be.
Well, no, actually, I thought I was going to work with parents to build schools, to be honest.
That was the first iteration?
It was. And when I wrote the MicroSchool Builders Handbook, that was really its ideal target audience, was a parent who wanted something different. But the problem I found, I worked with a couple parents who were not educators, and the problem I ran into consistently was, and this does not mean I don't work with parents, because I do, but I found that when I worked with a teacher, we had teaching practices, content, knowledge of pedagogy, knowledge of helping kids be
common core language. And
we did. And that meant that we didn't have to spend much time on those topics, and we could devote more of our time to the fundamental basics of building a business. So knowing that you actually had a market for your school, knowing who your ideal student would be, knowing how to market that school as a niche solution, that's something that would actually get people excited and get them want to come to your school, figuring out how to create your first budget that would actually pay you in the first year, and that would be balanced, how to find a space that would let you start out kind of on a shoestring budget, but grow, all kinds of things related to building and opening a business successfully. That's actually the work that I've been doing for the last 2 years, is really honing in on what are the pieces that we need to get open and effectively, and then become really viable and stable.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting model. I mean, and obviously, the idea of paying out of pocket for your kids' schooling isn't something that every family can do or wants to do. But I do think that we're sitting primed right now for a little bit of an explosion of smaller, focused, small classroom kind of
Well, so
micro
that
schools, and
was,
they have to be viable financially.
yeah, the small actually. So if you were to look up the word microschool in Wikipedia, one of the definitions is that it's under 150 students. So they're smaller than our typical public schools. Most
Hmm.
elementary schools have more than 150 kids.
Right.
But most of my clients start out with 10. I even have a couple that started under 10. Now, the silver lining to that has been they're building their school as a proof of concept. So they're really working on a shoestring budget. And if for some reason they either decide they don't like it or it doesn't actually work or, whatever, something happens and they need to close their doors, they haven't, gone in. Parents who are out there, and actually it's a great model. If parents want to open a school, the best thing to do is to go and get an Acton Academy started, because the curriculum is there. There's a network of schools there, and the Sandifords have designed their model to serve the parent who has kids that they want to open a school for.
So this is another kind of alternative schooling
Yeah.
option that you're referencing.
Yeah. But the thing about the Acton Academies is that they all have they use a very similar model of teaching and learning. My sweet spot is, so here's what I think. I mean, I am all about kids being self-directed learners. And in order for a kid to be a self-directed learner, you have to know how to guide a self-directed learner. The work that I do with the educators who come to build a microschool is actually self-directed learning at its best. It is this very ill-structured, authentic learning task. You come at it with this idea of like, can I open a school on my own and make it go? And I guide them through that. And the cool thing about it is every single one of the micro schools in our network is different from the other. And you know that, you work with them. Like, not one of them looks anything like the others. The beauty of that is each one of those owners has done the task that they're hopefully going to have their learners do on their learning level. So their students are going to come up with something that they want to explore and learn about at depth. And then they're going to have this chance to do that. I'm giving the adult learner, the owner of a school, a chance to do inquiry around opening their own school. And that's not something that anybody else is doing. I can assure you that. So, I mean, that's how we're different. It's not for everybody. I love being at a place, Liz, where I really know who we serve, how we serve them. And I am so content to send people off in other directions when there's a better fit. It took me a long time to get here. But
I think it's true for everybody, no matter what you're doing, whether you're building schools or selling widgets or whatever. Everybody goes through that phase of everybody looks like competition, and that feels uncomfortable. And the reality is we can do just fine with other people out there in the marketplace. It's a good thing.
Well, that's why when we work with our school builders, we spend a lot of time on knowing who your client is, knowing your niche market, because if you can very clearly articulate the child that you serve, the kid will show up and they'll either be a good fit or they won't. And if they're not a good fit, you'll actually know who all of your competition is.
Yeah.
And you'll send the kids off to the school that's the better fit for them. And that's the kind of world I want to live in. It's kind of like, it's not the most perfect metaphor, but it's kind of like the slow foods movement, or the farm to table movement. We've got all of these across the country, all of these beautiful restaurants popping up that are using locally sourced foods, and they're creating these beautiful dishes that meet this need for this market of people who want something really special, really unique. And they're all one of a kind. And I think that's what I hope for the microschools movement, is that we get more of that, because the more choices we have out there for kids and for families, the happier people are going to be.
Yeah, I think it's that in a nutshell. What I like about what you've done with the collective and the fact that people do feel a lot of autonomy in the process, they're creating something that makes them sing, is that they can all come to the networking conversations, collective conversations, and there isn't this sense of I'm in competition with A, B, or C person who's here. It's all very supportive, which is important whether you think of yourself as a traditional business owner or, you're a teacher going out on your own. We all need to have community, and we need to have supportive community.
Well, part of why they don't see each other as competition is they're not in the same locations. So really what our microschools do is they're very place-based, even though we're doing a lot of work online, and we could potentially, be reaching globally with our online services. None of my clients that's not their primary focus. They know how many students they would like to have based on their capacity to work with kids individually. And on the other hand, their budget.
Mm-hmm.
And so for most of them, they're only ever looking for a handful of kids. If you were trying to open a school for 150 kids, you would be hard pressed to get 150 people to sign up right now.
It takes time.
It does. But if you're looking for 2 or 3 kids, you just have a couple conversations with your current families and they bring in a couple friends and you're done. And so it's not as difficult as it would be to open a larger school. The one thing I didn't mention is, the schools, our micro schools, have actually been very crisis proof in the sense of, because their overhead's fairly low, they've been able to be a little more flexible with their families about their tuition payments. But more importantly, they've been able to stay open longer because, I'll give you in one case, one of the schools in Minnesota, going into the COVID crisis, had 7 students total. 2 of them were already online. 2 of them were the owners' 2 children, and the remaining 3 kids came from only 2 families. So in total, there were only 4 families, and technically really only 3 families. And the families just made a commitment to one another to stay as isolated as they could. And the kids were able to go to school until the governor of the state gave the final, everybody shelter at home, can't go out anywhere. But for a long time, they were under an order of gatherings of less than 10. And they were able to continue to meet much longer than most people were. And when they went to online, there really were no hiccups because they had already had 2 kids who were online learners. And they already were used to having meetings together to talk to those 2 kids while they were out road schooling for the year. And this has been the case in most of the schools we're working with, that they already have technologies in place to do online things. The kids have independent learning plans. And so, there's a lot of independence even when they are together physically. So they're able to sort of ease in and ease out of
restrictions and things.
Restrictions a lot more easily and without the trauma frankly, it's trauma. There's a lot of trauma going on, both on the part of parents and teachers and kids.
Oh yeah.
And it's trauma from the pandemic, not just from school being closed. But they've actually been able to spend time, these micro schools have been able to take time to talk about the feelings related to COVID. That's not in any curriculum anywhere.
Right. Yep. I think there's a lot to be said for it. And so I appreciate you coming on. I just wanted to give everybody the opportunity to hear, some of the alternative types of businesses that are being built out there as well. And I thought it was very timely because there are just so many parents and teachers as well who are feeling very strapped, and so many people saying, well, even if school opens back up in the fall, I'm not sending my kid, I'm looking for an alternative. Well, the reality is the alternatives are out there. So if anybody wants to reach out and find you, we'll make sure that there's links to your website in the show notes, but is there anything else you want to share?
No, just that, look, if you don't want to send your kid back to school, you have a lot of options. Actually, if you go to my website, you can find both of my books. The first book is called Help, My Child Hates School. And in that book, and you can get a PDF copy of that. You can buy it on Amazon. You don't need to do that. You can get a whole bunch of ideas about how to figure out what kind of school would suit your kid. But there are more choices out there than ever. I mean, there are a ton of online choices. Most communities have a Waldorf or a Montessori school. Our Catholic schools tend to have smaller class sizes, so they may not be quite so impacted. But if you don't have a lot of money, you can look into cyber schools. because at least that way your child would have content that's already been designed and built for online learning, and have teachers who already have those skill sets built.
We're,
Most.
yeah. No, I think it depends on where you are. But in New Hampshire, for example, there's, an online school that's been around for 15, maybe 20 years now, 15 anyway. And the nice thing about it is that you can drop in and drop out as a New Hampshire resident. Like our kids are taking some classes this summer just to give them something to do, and they get credit for it, and it's supported by the public school system. So I think there are a lot of things like that we don't necessarily think are available, even available for younger kids. So definitely check that out.
There's tons of people out there that have created content for homeschooling. There are full homeschooling curriculum you can find. There are a couple schools that even offer the homeschool content with the teacher. You can get, it just really runs the gamut from you do it all yourself to you can pay somebody else to do it, or you can have, traditional online school.
I think this is like a secret market for many of us who grew up in traditional public school families, thinking you just send your kid down the bus, and that's all that there is. But there's many, many layers of opportunity out there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's, one of the most rapidly growing one is Outschool that, he was the guy who founded that company, basically created a place where teachers could go and create small classes and offer them at a fairly low cost. And basically they're doing all of this, the supporting of the technologies and the marketing for teachers. And it was something that was used by the homeschooling community quite a bit, but during the pandemic, I think they actually have now hired 2,000 or 3,000 new teachers and added all kinds of new content. So lots of people are using them. That's not a full-blown school replacement. That is a pick and choose the things you want, but it's a good place to go to for summer options if you're looking for stuff like that. But people can grab either one of my books. If you think you want to build a school, I do free consultations with people. Everything's on my website. You just go have a look around. And I think I still have a call to action button on the top of the page that says, if you want to find a micro school for your child, I'm happy to talk with you about that.
We have some connections.
Yeah. There are lots of options out there for you.
Awesome.
Don't just put your kid back into school if it doesn't feel like the right choice because you think you have to.
Yeah. All right. Everybody gets this question at the end. From your perspective, what does Zen Money mean to you?
Well, I can't think of Zen Money and not think of you, Liz. Anyway, for people who don't know this, Liz and I have known each other since she wrote the first book. And so I've known about her work, but really for me, the sort of Zen of Zen Money is feeling really calm and peaceful about it, knowing what my numbers are at any given time, and being able to make decisions based on the numbers and not just, I'm an intuitive person. You asked this question a while back. You said, is it money for you more intuition or more numbers? And before working with you, Liz, it was definitely intuitive, and it wasn't wrong. I did okay with that, but I actually feel much calmer having both the numbers and my intuition to guide me now. I guess that's what Zen Money would mean for me, is sort of combining those two skill sets together.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. What came to my mind when you said that was, for example, in your business recently, there was an opportunity that you were thinking about spending on, as an investment to level things up, and you wanted to do it, but we were able to take some time and just be like, all right, here's the ramifications. Does it fit with the overall plan? And I think that made you feel that much more confident in spending that amount of money.
Yeah. In the past, I would have just, if it felt right to my gut, I would just do it. And then I'd figure out how to pay for it. And that's probably not the most responsible way to run a business, especially not now. I loved being able to look back over, I think I looked back over 5 years of financial data and looked at what I had spent and how I had paid that back. And the investment that you helped me choose to make has been, I was so confident making it. It was paid off within a month. And the payback I've gotten from the work that I did with that coach, I'm going to see the benefits of that for a long time to come.
What's interesting about that particular story, and the reason that I wanted to share it with our listeners, is that I see so many people making intuitive decisions around their finances, and the decision itself, like you say, isn't a bad idea, but somehow also being able to ground it very clearly in terms of, if I do X, then Y should also happen in my business so that I'm not in a hole forever. Like having those real granular details around the decision make it that much more likely that the person is going to get full value out of the spend. Because I think sometimes people just do the, click and buy. Maybe there's some remorse, maybe there's not, but they don't necessarily like go into the, if we're spending money like that, we want to be getting something out of it. And if we don't go in clearly thinking, here's what I need to get X thousands of dollars worth of value back, I'm going to show up 110%. Sometimes we click buy, we make the big spend, and then we find reasons to not go to the call, to not fully engage in the materials, or not learn at that high level. And I think being able to have both really helps us, be aware of, if we're going to spend the money, let's make sure we spend the time so that the resources we're getting from that spend are really implemented.
Well, the probably one of the best parts of this spend was that it was less than any of the other spends I'd had for coaching, which was awesome. It was a shorter program, so that was why. But probably the single best thing that happened was this coach actually allowed me to bring 2 people from my team in, so I didn't have to go and teach my team how to use the methods that I had learned. They knew them as well, which is super powerful.
Yeah, it's a great sales technique for anyone listening and thinking about that.
Well, it's just got me thinking about, I actually have a client right now who just hired a teacher, and I've said to her to bring her teacher with her. I mean, she's going to have a much stronger business, a much stronger school based on the 2 of them having the same language and the same mindset. So, it's got me thinking about it too. That, having teams. I don't generally work with teams of people simply because I think it's really good for the school owner to have a strong foundation. But in this case, it's still the school owner and her employee.
Yeah, so, of course. Well, thank you so much for joining us today to have this conversation about education building. And if anyone wants to reach out, as we said, you can check out Mara at microschoolbuilders.com.
That's right.
And we'll put the links in the show notes.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you. Have a great week, everybody.